The shopping bags hit the marble floor like accusations. 12 of them. Nordstrom, Saks, Tiffany. The sound echoed through our brownstone apartment, bouncing off the exposed brick walls that Vera insisted made us look authentic to her father's business associates. "It's my money too," she announced, not bothering to look at me as she kicked off her Louboutin heels. The red soles caught the lamplight like fresh paint. I nodded slowly from my position on the leather couch, laptop balanced on my knees. The cursor blinked on my cybersecurity consulting report, but my attention was entirely on my wife of 4 years. Vera Halden, née Morrison, stood in our living room like she owned it. Which, according to the mortgage papers, she did. 50-50 split, just like everything else in our marriage. "Let's talk about money," I said. She paused, one hand on the banister leading to our bedroom. Something in my tone must have registered because she turned around, really looked at me for the first time since walking through the door. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled despite the October wind outside. Her makeup flawless despite the 3-hour shopping marathon. Everything about Vera was always perfect, except for the parts I'd been discovering since February. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. I closed the laptop and stood up, walking to my home office. The room was small, cramped with computer equipment and filing cabinets that Vera always complained made the apartment look cluttered. I pulled out a manila folder from the top drawer of my desk. Thick, heavy, 4 months of careful documentation. "Cole?" Her voice had changed. The entitled edge was still there, but underneath I heard something new. Uncertainty. I returned to the living room and sat back down on the couch, placing the folder on the coffee table between us. The same table where we'd signed our marriage certificate 4 years ago, champagne glasses leaving rings on the wood that Vera had complained about for weeks. $37,000, I said, opening the folder to reveal the credit card statements on top. 6 cards, 3 weeks. I looked up at her. "That's impressive, even for you." She crossed her arms, defensive posture activated. "We can afford it. My father's company pays you well for the IT consulting. Your father's company pays me $48,000 a year for network security. Hardly enough to cover a Tiffany bracelet, let alone everything in those bags. We have savings. We had savings." I pulled out the next document, our joint checking account statement. "Down to $4,000 as of yesterday. But you're right about one thing. We do have money." I reached deeper into the folder and pulled out a bank statement she'd never seen before. First Maritime Bank. Account opened 18 months ago. Current balance, $127,000. Vera went pale. "Funny thing about banks," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "They're required to report certain transactions, large deposits, regular patterns, and when you're married to someone who makes his living finding security vulnerabilities, well," I shrugged. "Let's just say your password game needs work." She sat down hard in the armchair across from me, her designer dress spreading around her like spilled ink. "Cole, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But first, let me show you what else I found." I pulled out the shell company registration, Morrison Consulting, LLC, filed with the state of Massachusetts 14 months ago. Sole proprietor, Vera Morrison. Business address, a UPS store in downtown Boston. "Consulting," I said, reading from the paperwork. "Interesting career change. When did you leave project management?" "That's not, She stopped, her composure cracking like ice on a spring pond. "Revenue for Morrison Consulting in the past 12 months, $340,000. Clients, 3. Actual consulting work performed." I pretended to flip through pages. "Well, that's where it gets interesting." The next document was a forensic accounting report. 43 pages of financial analysis that had cost me $8,000 to commission, worth every penny. "Meet Patricia Hendricks," I said, tapping the signature on the report's cover page. "Former IRS investigator, current forensic accountant, She has a very interesting theory about Morrison Consulting's revenue stream. Vera's hands were shaking now. She tried to hide it by clasping them in her lap. But I'd been watching her tells for 4 years, the way she bit her lower lip when she lied, how her left eye twitched when she was cornered, the slight flush that crept up her neck when she was caught. The deposits to First Maritime, I continued. $8,500, every month, like clockwork, always from Morrison Consulting's business account, always on the 15th. I pulled out another document. Wire transfer records. But here's the really fascinating part. Morrison Consulting gets paid by 3 clients, Hartwell Manufacturing, Coastal Logistics, and Northern Industrial Supply. I looked up at her. All vendors for Morrison Manufacturing, your father's company. The flush had reached her cheeks now. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The invoices are very professional, I said, pulling out copies. Business consulting services, strategic planning, market analysis, all approved by the procurement department, all signed by authorized personnel. I placed the final document on the table, a signature analysis report. Your father's signature appears on 47 invoices, totaling $340,000. Patricia's handwriting expert is 94% certain he didn't sign a single one. Vera made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. But someone with access to his signature cards did? Someone who works in project management? Someone who processes vendor payments? Someone who would know exactly how to make fake invoices look legitimate? She was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Cole, please, you don't understand. Oh, but I do understand. See, I also understand about Barcelona. Her face went completely white. I reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a hotel receipt. The International Business Conference. Last March. Morrison Manufacturing sent you as their representative. Very generous of them to pay for your trip. The receipt showed 2 rooms booked under the corporate account. Standard procedure for business travel. Always book separate accommodations to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Except for this, I said, placing a second document next to the receipt. Keycard access logs. Hotel security data that had cost me 3 months of favors and $2,000 to obtain through a private investigator who specialized in corporate affairs. Room 1247, booked under your name, accessed March 15th through March 18th. But here's the interesting part. Room 1249, booked under Marcus Ventor's name, was never accessed. Not once. Because Mr. Ventor spent all 4 nights in room 1247. With you. Vera's breathing had become shallow, rapid. She looked like she might pass out. Marcus Ventor, I continued, my voice still conversational despite the rage building in my chest. Account manager at Morrison Manufacturing, authorized signatory on vendor payments, and according to the corporate directory, your business partner in Morrison Consulting, LLC. I closed the folder and leaned back on the couch, studying my wife's face. 4 years of marriage, 2 years of planning our future, 18 months of lies. So yes, Vera, you're absolutely right. It is your money too. Every stolen dollar of it. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Vera sat frozen in the armchair, her perfect composure shattered like expensive china. I'd seen her handle boardroom presentations, navigate complex project timelines, and charm her father's business associates with effortless grace. But this was different. This was her staring at the wreckage of her carefully constructed double life. How long have you known? She whispered. Known what, exactly? That you were stealing from your father's company? That you were having an affair? Or that you've been playing me for a fool since we got married? She flinched at each accusation. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Help me understand how Morrison Consulting provides $340,000 worth of legitimate services to companies that already have full-time staff for everything you're supposedly consulting on. Marcus had connections, opportunities. He said we could make some extra money. Extra money? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Vera, this isn't selling crafts on Etsy. This is fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. Patricia's report identifies 14 separate felonies. The word felonies hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over slightly, one hand pressed to her stomach. And the affair? I asked. Was that just extra too? Her silence was answer enough. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Commonwealth Avenue. October in Boston meant the trees were showing their colors, brilliant reds and golds that would be gone in a few weeks. Everything beautiful had its season, I supposed. I hired a private investigator in April, I said, not turning around. After I found the first maritime statements. Professional curiosity, you might say. Amazing what people will do for money when they think they're being clever. Behind me, I heard Vera moving. The rustle of fabric, the soft sound of her feet on the hardwood floor. When I turned around, she was standing by the shopping bags, as if their presence could somehow anchor her to the life she'd been living an hour ago. David Chen, I continued, former Boston PD detective, specializes in corporate investigations. Very thorough, very expensive, very worth it. I walked back to the coffee table and pulled out another section of the folder I hadn't shown her yet. Surveillance photos. The Marriott downtown, every second Tuesday for the past 6 months, always the same routine. You arrive at 11:30, Marcus gets there at noon. You leave separately around 3. I placed the photos on the table one by one. David's very good with a telephoto lens. Vera was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Her mascara was starting to run, creating dark tracks down her cheeks that made her look like a broken doll. The Peninsula Hotel in Chicago, last month's client meeting. Except Morrison Consulting doesn't have any clients in Chicago. Another photo. The Ritz-Carlton in New York, 2 weeks ago. Funny how your business travel always coincides with Marcus's. Cole, please. Please what? Please pretend I don't know? Please act like everything's normal while you and your partner steal from your father and lie to my face every single day? She was sobbing now, her carefully constructed facade completely demolished. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to go back to the way things were before I knew the truth. 4 years of marriage creates habits that are hard to break, even when the foundation crumbles. But I thought about the credit card statements, the casual way she dismissed my concerns about our finances, the entitlement in her voice when she said, "It's my money too." The months of planning and scheming while she kissed me goodnight and told me she loved me. "Your father doesn't know," I said. She looked up sharply, hope flickering in her eyes. "Yet," I added, and watched the hope disappear. "I have a meeting scheduled with him Friday morning, 9 a.m., his office." "No." The word came out as a whisper. "Cole, you can't. It would destroy him. It would destroy him to know his daughter is a thief and his employee is forging his signature to fund an affair? Or would it destroy him to know I've been sitting on evidence of corporate fraud for 4 months without telling him?" She stood up unsteadily, reaching toward me. "Please, we can work this out. I'll pay it back. I'll end things with Marcus. We can go to counseling." "With what money, Vera? The $127,000 you've hidden in First Maritime? That's evidence now. Patricia's report goes to the authorities Monday morning unless..." "Unless what?" I walked back to my office and returned with a single sheet of paper, legal-sized, dense with text. I placed it on the coffee table next to the forensic report. Asset disclosure agreement, full financial transparency, uncontested divorce, no alimony. You sign over your interest in the apartment, the car, and any joint accounts. She stared at the document like it was a snake. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You have until midnight tonight to decide." Sign the agreement and Patricia's report stays confidential. Your father never has to know what his daughter and Marcus have been doing. The authorities never get involved. And if I don't sign? Then Monday morning gets very interesting for a lot of people. Your father finds out his company has been defrauded. The district attorney gets a very detailed report about Morrison Consulting. Marcus discovers that his authorized signature access has been revoked and his employment terminated. I checked my watch. It's currently 8:47 p.m. You have 3 hours and 13 minutes to decide how this ends. Vera sank back into the armchair, her head in her hands. The shopping bags sat forgotten by the door, their contents suddenly irrelevant compared to the choice in front of her. "This is blackmail," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "This is consequences." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my office, staring at the computer screen where I'd compiled everything into a comprehensive digital file. Bank records, wire transfers, hotel receipts, surveillance photos, forensic analysis. 18 months of lies reduced to ones and zeros, waiting for a decision that would determine how many lives got destroyed. At 11:47 p.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Vera appeared in my doorway, still wearing the same dress from her shopping expedition, but now it was wrinkled and stained with tears. She held the asset disclosure agreement in one trembling hand. "I need a pen," she whispered. I handed her my Mont Blanc, the one she'd given me for our second anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Her signature was shaky, barely legible, but legally binding. I witnessed it and dated it, then placed the document in my desk drawer next to Patricia's forensic report. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you pack a bag and find somewhere else to stay. The apartment's in my name as of—" I checked the clock on my computer. 6 minutes ago. She nodded numbly and left without another word. I heard her moving around upstairs, drawers opening and closing, the sound of a suitcase being dragged across the floor. At 12:23 a.m., the front door closed with a soft click. I was alone with 12 shopping bags full of designer clothes and accessories that had cost more than most people made in 6 months. The next morning, I loaded everything into my Honda Civic and drove to the Goodwill Donation Center in Cambridge. The volunteer who helped me unload looked like she'd won the lottery. "Someone's going to be very happy with these donations," she said, holding up a Hermes scarf that still had the tags attached. "I hope so," I replied, and meant it. But Vera's signature was only the beginning. The real work started Monday morning when I called in sick to Morrison Manufacturing and spent the day making appointments with lawyers, accountants, and a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. By Wednesday, I'd filed for divorce, changed the locks on the apartment, and transferred all joint assets into accounts that only I could access. The legal system moved slowly, but money moved fast when you knew which buttons to push. Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Marcus Ventor. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I don't think we do." "Listen, you little—" He caught himself, probably remembering that threatening someone over the phone was inadvisable. "Vera told me about your arrangement. I think you're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting my wife. But that's been corrected. You don't understand the situation you're in. Morrison Manufacturing is a big company with a lot of influence in this city. Mr. Morrison values loyalty. He wouldn't appreciate someone causing problems for his family." I almost laughed. Marcus was trying to intimidate me using Vera's father, who didn't even know about the affair or the embezzlement yet. It was like being threatened by someone wielding a rubber knife. "Speaking of Mr. Morrison," I said, "I'm meeting with him tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Should I mention that you called?" The line went quiet for several seconds. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had lost its threatening edge. "What do you want?" "I want you to stay away from me and stay away from Vera. I want Morrison Consulting to dissolve quietly and all stolen funds to be returned to Morrison Manufacturing through anonymous channels. And I want you to find a new job, preferably in a different city. And if I don't? Then tomorrow's meeting with Mr. Morrison becomes very interesting for both of us. Your choice. He hung up without responding. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Boston October weather that matched my mood perfectly. Morrison Manufacturing occupied 4 floors of a glass tower in the financial district, with Robert Morrison's corner office on the top floor overlooking Boston Harbor. I'd met Vera's father dozens of times over the years, but always in social settings where he was playing the role of gracious host or proud father. This was different. This was business, and Robert Morrison hadn't built a $50 million manufacturing company by being gracious. "Cole," he said, standing behind his mahogany desk as his secretary showed me in. "This is unexpected. I thought you were handling our network security remotely this quarter." "This isn't about IT consulting, Mr. Morrison. I need to show you something that affects your company's financial security." His expression shifted immediately. Robert Morrison was 62 years old, silver-haired, and sharp as a blade when it came to business. He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk and sat down, giving me his complete attention. I placed Patricia's forensic report on his desk, opened to the executive summary. "Your company has been defrauded of approximately $340,000 over the past 14 months, I said. The money was stolen through fake consulting invoices approved using forged signatures. He read the first page in silence, his face growing darker with each paragraph. When he looked up, his eyes were ice cold. "Who?" I placed the Morrison Consulting registration on his desk, followed by the bank statements and wire transfer records. Vera and Marcus Ventor. They created a shell company and submitted fake invoices for consulting services that were never performed. The invoices were approved using forged versions of your signature. Robert Morrison was quiet for a long time, studying the documents with the same intensity he probably brought to major business decisions. Finally, he looked up at me. "You're divorcing her." It wasn't a question. He'd already figured out that I wouldn't be sitting in his office if this was a problem we could solve as a family. The divorce papers were filed Monday. She signed an asset disclosure agreement that prevents her from claiming any joint property. And Marcus? Still employed here as far as I know, still has signature authority on vendor payments. He reached for his phone and pressed a button. "Janet, get me HR and security. Conference room B, 10 minutes. He looked at me. "How long have you known?" 4 months. I hired a forensic accountant to document everything before taking any action. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since February. Because she's your daughter. Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to give her a chance to make it right. And did she? Make it right? She signed the divorce papers. That's as right as it's going to get. He nodded slowly, then stood up and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. "Marcus Ventor has worked here for 6 years. Good employee record. No red flags during his background check." He turned back to me. "I suppose people change when enough money is involved. Or maybe they just show you who they really are." By noon, Marcus Ventor was escorted from the building by security, his access cards deactivated, his company car repossessed, and his final paycheck reduced by the amount of a mandatory audit that would determine exactly how much money he'd helped steal. The story spread through Morrison Manufacturing like wildfire, and from there into the broader Boston business community where Robert Morrison was well known and respected. By the end of the week, everyone who mattered knew that Vera Morrison had defrauded her own father's company, and Marcus Ventor had been fired for embezzlement. In a city like Boston, where business relationships were built on trust and reputation, that kind of scandal was a professional execution. Marcus would never work in corporate finance again, at least not in New England, and Vera's career in project management was effectively over before it started. But I wasn't finished yet. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed once Vera realized she had no choice but to cooperate. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Catherine Walsh who specialized in high-asset divorces, tried to negotiate better terms, but the asset disclosure agreement Vera had signed was ironclad. "Your wife made some very poor decisions," Catherine told me during our one face-to-face meeting, "but she's still entitled to fair treatment under Massachusetts law." "She's entitled to exactly what she agreed to," I replied. "Nothing more, nothing less. The apartment, the car, the joint accounts, everything transferred to my name without contest." Vera had moved in with her college roommate in Somerville, a cramped two-bedroom that was a far cry from our brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue. According to my sources, she was working as a temp at a marketing firm, making barely enough to cover her share of the rent. Marcus, meanwhile, had disappeared entirely. His luxury condo in the Back Bay went up for sale, and rumors circulated that he'd moved to Florida or California, somewhere far from the Boston business community that had effectively blacklisted him. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday evening in November. I was working late in my office when I heard footsteps on the front porch, followed by aggressive knocking on the door. Not the polite knock of a neighbor or delivery person. This was someone who wanted to make a point. I looked through the peephole and saw a man I didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket and an expression that suggested he wasn't here to sell magazine subscriptions. I kept the chain lock engaged when I opened the door. "Cole Halden?" he asked. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Tommy Ricci. I work for Marcus Ventor. He'd like to have a conversation with you." "Marcus can call me if he wants to talk." Tommy smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "He tried calling. You didn't answer, so he sent me to deliver the message in person." "What message?" "You cost him his job, his reputation, his future in this city. He thinks you owe him some compensation for that." I almost laughed. He cost himself those things when he decided to commit fraud. I just made sure people found out about it. "See, that's where you're wrong. Marcus was doing fine until you stuck your nose where it didn't belong. Now he's got lawyers to pay, debts to cover, and a very expensive lifestyle to maintain." "Sounds like a personal problem." Tommy's smile disappeared. "Mr. Ventor thinks you should contribute to solving that problem. Let's say $50,000, as a gesture of goodwill." "And if I decline this generous opportunity?" "Then we have another conversation. Maybe not as friendly as this one." I looked at Tommy through the gap in the door, studying his face. He was trying to project menace, but there was something desperate in his eyes. This wasn't a professional intimidation. This was amateur hour. "Tell Marcus I said no, and tell him that if you or anyone else shows up at my door again, I'll be calling the police, and my lawyer, and probably the district attorney who's been very interested in the Morrison Manufacturing case." Tommy's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, Halden." "I've made plenty of mistakes. Trusting my wife was one of them. But I'm done making mistakes where Marcus Ventor is concerned." I closed the door and listened to his footsteps retreating down the porch steps. Then I called Patricia Hendricks, the forensic accountant, and asked her to recommend a good security system installer. The cameras went up the next day. High definition, motion activated with cloud storage that would preserve any footage, even if someone tried to disable the local equipment. I also bought a new deadbolt, reinforced the door frame, and installed motion sensor lights that would turn the front of the building into a floodlit stage if anyone approached after dark. It felt like overkill, but paranoia was just pattern recognition when you'd already been betrayed once. 2 weeks later, Marcus made his next move. I was having lunch at a small cafe near my office when I spotted him sitting at a table by the window, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee like he had every right to be there. He was wearing an expensive suit that he probably couldn't afford anymore, and his hair was perfectly styled despite the fact that he was supposed to be broke and unemployed. Our eyes met through the glass, and he smiled. Not the desperate smile of someone who'd lost everything, but the confident smile of someone who thought he still had cards to play. I paid for my sandwich and walked outside, stopping at his table. "Marcus, I heard you'd left town. Just taking some time to reassess my options." He folded the newspaper and looked up at me. "Funny thing about options, they have a way of multiplying when you're creative." "Is that supposed to mean something?" "It means I've been thinking about our situation, about what you cost me and what that's worth in today's market. Your friend Tommy already delivered that message. My answer hasn't changed." Marcus laughed. "Tommy's not my friend. He's just someone who owed me a favor. But this conversation is different. This is about information." "What kind of information?" "The kind that Robert Morrison might find very interesting. About his son-in-law's business practices. About how certain network security consultants use their access to gather information that goes beyond their job description." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. "You're talking nonsense." "Am I?" "Because I've been doing some research of my own. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Corporate espionage is a serious crime, Cole, especially when it involves accessing confidential financial records without authorization." He was bluffing. He had to be. Everything I'd done was legal. I'd used publicly available information, hired legitimate professionals, and followed proper procedures for gathering evidence of fraud. But the doubt was there now, a small voice in the back of my mind asking whether I'd crossed any lines in my investigation. Whether my access to Morrison Manufacturing's network had given me information I wasn't supposed to have. Whether Marcus had found some technicality that could turn me from the victim into the perpetrator. "You're fishing," I said. "Maybe, but fishing works when you know the right bait to use." He stood up and dropped a $20 bill on the table. "Think about it, Cole. $50,000 is a lot less expensive than a legal defense fund." He walked away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the uncomfortable realization that this wasn't over. Not even close. That evening, I called David Chen, the private investigator who'd helped me document Vera's affair. "I need to know everything about Marcus Ventor," I told him. "Where he's living, how he's paying his bills, who he's talking to, what he's planning." "That's going to be expensive," David warned. "More expensive than a criminal defense attorney?" "Point taken. Give me a week." While David worked his contacts, I spent my time reviewing every step of my investigation, looking for any action that could be construed as illegal or unethical. I'd been careful, but careful wasn't the same as perfect, and Marcus only needed one mistake to turn the tables. The answer came from an unexpected source: Vera herself. She called on a Friday evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cole, we need to talk. It's about Marcus." "I don't have anything to say to you, Vera." "He's planning something that could hurt both of us." Despite everything that had happened between us, I could hear genuine fear in her voice. "What kind of something?" "Can we meet? Somewhere public. I'll explain everything." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Harvard Square. She looked terrible, thin, pale, wearing clothes that were obviously second-hand. The confident, entitled woman who'd dropped 12 shopping bags in our living room was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "He's been calling me," she said without preamble. "Marcus, he wants me to sign an affidavit saying that you hacked into Morrison Manufacturing systems to get information for your divorce." "That's ridiculous. Everything I used was obtained legally." "I know that. You know that. But Marcus thinks he can create enough doubt to leverage a settlement from you. He's desperate, Cole. He owes money to people who don't accept payment plans." "What kind of people?" "The kind who sent Tommy Ricci to your door. Marcus borrowed money to maintain his lifestyle after he lost his job. Now they want it back, with interest." The pieces were starting to fit together. Marcus wasn't just trying to extort money from me. He was trying to save his own life. What did you tell him? I told him no, but he's not giving up. He says he has other ways to make this work. What other ways? Vera looked around the coffee shop nervously, then leaned closer. He's been talking to reporters, business journalists who cover corporate fraud cases. He wants to sell them a story about how Morrison Manufacturing's IT consultant used his access to spy on employees and steal confidential information. That's defamation. He can't prove any of that. He doesn't have to prove it. He just has to create enough doubt to make you want the story to go away, and the only way to make it go away is to pay him. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Marcus was more desperate and more dangerous than I'd realized. A man with nothing to lose was capable of almost anything. Why are you telling me this, Vera? What's in it for you? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like it might contain answers. Because despite everything that happened between us, I don't want to see you destroyed. And because Marcus scares me now. The man I thought I knew wouldn't have sent Tommy to threaten you. This version of him, I don't know what he's capable of. So what do you suggest? I suggest you be very careful, and I suggest you find a way to end this before it gets worse. She left without finishing her coffee, disappearing into the Harvard Square crowd like a ghost from my former life. I sat there for another hour, thinking about Marcus and Tommy and reporters, and the uncomfortable realization that my carefully planned revenge was about to become something much more complicated. David Chen called me the next morning with information that changed everything. Marcus Ventor is broke, he said without preamble. Completely, utterly broke. His condo's in foreclosure, his car's been repossessed, and he owes approximately $200,000 to various creditors. What kind of creditors? The expensive kind. Credit cards, personal loans, and at least $50,000 to a gentleman named Vincent Torino, who operates what you might call an alternative lending business. That explained Tommy Ricci's visit. Vincent Torino was a name I recognized from news reports about organized crime in Boston, not someone you wanted to owe money to. There's more, David continued. Marcus has been trying to sell his story to reporters, just like your ex-wife said, but he's not getting any takers. The business journalists I spoke with said his claims about corporate espionage don't hold water. They've seen the Morrison Manufacturing case files, and everything points to straightforward embezzlement. So he's bluffing. He's desperate, which makes him dangerous in a different way. Desperate people do stupid things. David was right, but knowing that Marcus was bluffing didn't solve my immediate problem. As long as he was out there making threats and spreading lies, I was looking over my shoulder waiting for the next shoe to drop. That's when I decided to stop being reactive and start being proactive. I spent the weekend developing a plan that would end Marcus's threats permanently, not through violence or intimidation, but through the same methodical documentation and strategic revelation that had worked so well with Vera. Monday morning, I called Robert Morrison and requested another meeting. I thought we'd resolved the situation with Vera and Marcus, he said when I was seated in his office. We resolved the immediate fraud issue, but Marcus is still making threats. He's trying to extort money from me by claiming I used illegal methods to gather evidence against him. Robert's expression darkened. What kind of threats? I told him about Tommy Ricci's visit, the attempted extortion, and Marcus's efforts to sell a false story to reporters. I also mentioned Vincent Torino, though I was careful not to imply any direct connection to organized crime. Marcus Ventor is becoming a liability to your company's reputation, I concluded. Every day he's out there making wild accusations is another day that Morrison Manufacturing gets mentioned in connection with fraud and embezzlement. What do you suggest? I suggest we remove his ability to make credible threats, permanently. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same intensity he'd shown during our first meeting. What did you have in mind? A coordinated response that demonstrates exactly how unreliable Marcus's claims are. financial records showing his debts and desperation, documentation of his extortion attempts, evidence that he's been lying to reporters and potential business partners about his situation. You want to destroy him completely. I want to neutralize him. There's a difference. Robert was quiet for several minutes, weighing the implications of what I was proposing. Finally, he nodded. What do you need from me? Access to Morrison Manufacturing's legal team, a statement from the company about the embezzlement case, and your blessing to take whatever steps are necessary to protect both of us from further harassment. You have it. The next phase of my plan required careful timing and flawless execution. I started by having David Chen document every aspect of Marcus's financial situation, including his debts to Vincent Torino and the foreclosure proceedings on his condo. Then I reached out to the reporters Marcus had been contacting, not to dispute his claims, but to provide them with a more complete picture of his credibility. I shared David's financial investigation, recordings of Tommy Ricci's threats, and documentation showing that Marcus was facing significant legal and financial pressure. The reporters weren't interested in a story about a desperate ex-employee making wild accusations to avoid paying his debts. They were interested in a story about corporate fraud and embezzlement, which they already had. By Thursday, Marcus's efforts to sell his story had completely collapsed. No legitimate news organization would touch his claims about corporate espionage, and his credibility was so damaged that even his other accusations were viewed with skepticism. That's when he made his final, desperate move. I was leaving my office Friday evening when I found Marcus waiting by my car in the parking garage. He looked worse than Vera had, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled suit, with the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who hadn't slept in days. "You think you're smart," he said as I approached, "smarter than someone who commits fraud and then tries to extort the person who exposed him. You have no idea what you've done. Vincent Torino doesn't care about your corporate investigation or your divorce settlement. He cares about his $50,000, and he expects me to get it from somewhere." That sounds like a personal problem. Marcus stepped closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. "It becomes your problem when Vincent decides that the person who destroyed my income stream should contribute to solving the cash flow issue. Are you threatening me with organized crime connections now? Because that's a new low, even for you. I'm telling you the truth. Vincent doesn't make idle threats, and he doesn't accept excuses. If I can't pay him back, he's going to look for alternative sources of compensation." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Are you saying that Vincent Torino plans to commit extortion or other crimes against me?" Marcus realized what I was doing and stepped back. "Turn that off. Are you threatening me on behalf of Vincent Torino? Are you acting as his agent in an attempt to extort money from me?" I said turn it off. "Because if you are, that's a federal crime. Extortion across state lines, conspiracy, racketeering. The FBI takes those charges very seriously." Marcus's face went white. He turned and walked quickly toward the stairwell, leaving me alone in the parking garage with a recorded confession of attempted extortion. I called David Chen immediately and had him deliver copies of the recording to the FBI, the Boston Police, and Morrison Manufacturing's legal team. I also had him send a copy to Vincent Torino's lawyer, along with a note explaining that Marcus Ventor was making unauthorized threats using Mr. Torino's name. The response was swift and decisive. Marcus was arrested Monday morning on charges of attempted extortion and making false statements to federal investigators. Vincent Torino's organization issued a statement through their attorney disavowing any connection to Marcus's threats and expressing their commitment to resolving business disputes through legal channels. Marcus's credibility was completely destroyed. No one would believe anything he said about me, Morrison Manufacturing, or the embezzlement case. His threats were revealed as the desperate lies of a man facing financial ruin and criminal prosecution. The final piece of my revenge fell into place when Marcus's lawyer contacted Morrison Manufacturing's legal team about a plea agreement. Marcus was willing to make full restitution for the embezzled funds in exchange for reduced charges and a recommendation for minimum sentencing. The only problem was that Marcus didn't have any money to make restitution with. That's when Robert Morrison made an offer that surprised everyone. Morrison Manufacturing would accept Marcus's full cooperation in recovering the stolen funds, including testimony against any other potential co-conspirators, in lieu of immediate financial restitution. The implication was clear. Marcus could reduce his legal exposure by providing complete information about how the embezzlement scheme worked and whether anyone else was involved. It was an offer designed to ensure that every detail of his crimes became part of the official record. Marcus accepted the deal, and his detailed confession became a matter of public record. Every lie he'd told, every document he'd forged, every dollar he'd stolen, all of it documented in his own words as part of his plea agreement. The man who had tried to destroy my reputation and extort money from me ended up providing a complete confession that vindicated everything I'd done to expose him. 6 months later, Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and 5 years of supervised probation. Vera received a suspended sentence and community service in exchange for her cooperation with the investigation. I kept the brownstone apartment, the car, and the satisfaction of knowing that my methodical approach to revenge had worked exactly as planned. Not through violence or illegal activity, but through patience, documentation, and strategic revelation of the truth. The shopping bags that had started everything were long gone, donated to people who could actually use designer clothes and accessories. But the lesson remained. When someone says, "It's my money too," sometimes the best response is to show them exactly whose money it really is. Marcus learned that lesson the hard way. So did Vera. And I learned that revenge, when properly executed, doesn't require getting your hands dirty. It just requires being smarter, more patient, and more thorough than the people who betrayed you. The last card in any game is always the one nobody sees coming.